Chapter 7, Traveling as a Card Counter, Money Security and Travel. In the late stages of my first team, we found a promotion offered on Mondays only at a casino 3 hours away. Like clockwork every Monday, Sammy and I headed out in the afternoon, arrived by 6 p.m., played until 2 or 3 a.m., and made it home just as the sun began to rise. It was a long night, but as we calculated the EV at $600 per hour each, it was worth a little exhaustion. Sammy and I weren't the best of friends, but we made the most of the long drives, talking about blackjack, poker, and whatever else we could come up with to pass the time, mostly day trading. Sammy was not only an incredibly knowledgeable card counter, he was also a day trader. He claimed that card counting was child's play compared to day trading, owing to the many variables outside of your control with the stock market. We chugged along the highway with $80,000 in a canvas bag at Sammy's feet, and I asked him 1,001 questions about day trading. The casino was out in the middle of nowhere, so the last half hour of the drive was a stretch of highway without any lights. In the dead of winter, that meant we were driving in pitch black by the time we got there. On one trip, all of a sudden, my headlights hit a white object right in front of us. It was 4 feet high and as wide as the lane. In recent years, I'd twice run over random objects on the freeway. Once, it was half of a car bumper. The other time it was a semi-truck tire retread. Both times, rather than swerving, I made the split-second call to just drive over the object. Both times, it had resulted in damage to my car, but at least I hadn't had to swerve at high speed. The white object now in front of us was 10 times the size of a car bumper or tire retread. Was it a cow lying on the road, a refrigerator? I had no choice but to swerve. When I overcorrected, the car went sideways and started rolling. After a complete roll, the car came to a stop while resting on Sammy's side. Sammy spoke first. "Are you okay?" "Yeah." "You?" "Yeah." "Where's the money?" I asked him. "It's right here." Sammy grabbed the canvas bag of cash at his feet. I managed to climb up and out of the driver's side window, which was now the top of the car. As I landed on the ground, I steadied my fall with my hands, only to cut them on the mess of glass from the broken windows. Sammy handed me the bag of cash, then asked me to steady the car so he could climb out. Sammy was 260 pounds and I was convinced I could successfully stop a 2-ton car if it started to roll. But I'd almost got him killed, so I did my best to steady the topsy-turvy car while he climbed out the driver's side window. We split up the $80,000, each putting $40,000 into our respective coat and pants pockets. Aside from some friction burns on my wrists from the airbag deploying and the minor cuts on my hands, we were both injury-free. Cars were now slamming on their brakes when they came upon the scene. That place really needed some streetlights. A few minutes later, a highway patrolman arrived, surveyed the scene, called for a tow truck, and started an accident report. The giant object I'd swerved to avoid? It turned out to be a plastic bag from a king-sized mattress. The bag must have flown out of the back of a truck and landed on the road, where the winds caught it and puffed it up. Sammy never let me live it down, sarcastically yelling, "Watch out!" Whenever a plastic grocery bag, sandwich bag, or any small object appeared on the road or a sidewalk. After filling out his report, the officer told me that he had made a determination that the accident wasn't my fault, going so far as to provide documentation for my insurance company stating it was just an unfortunate event. He then asked if we needed a ride anywhere. "Can you take us to the casino?" "Really? You still want to go to the casino?" "Well," I responded, "that's where we were going. We can have someone pick us up from there." "Okay, if that's really where you want to go." Half an hour later, we were counting cards at the casino. Every possession from the car that I could manage to fit into a plastic bag was now parked next to me at the blackjack table. Sammy and I played for 6 hours. By the end of the night, Sammy was down $7,200, but I'd won $24,700 on the promotional game, so our team was still a net positive $17,500. I was down one $4,000 car, of course, but insurance would eventually take care of that. We caught a ride back to the Seattle area from some card counter friends who also happened to be taking advantage of the valuable promo. A week later, we closed our bankroll and I made the biggest purchase of my life at that point, upgrading to a $10,000 car. That was 14 years ago and I'm still driving that $10,000 car. Is the point of the story that you need to bring $80,000 to the casino? Number. The point is that one time, I flipped my car on the way to the casino, got a ride from highway patrol, and proceeded to have my biggest win up to that point. But while we're on the topic, let's talk about how much money to bring with you on a trip. As with all things related to betting, deciding what the right amount to bring can be complicated. The factors involve bankroll, size, rules, number of decks, bet spread, risk tolerance, and the length of your trip. However, I can make some assumptions that will give you a few benchmark numbers. If you want more accurate information, I recommend our BJA Pro Betting Software or CVCX, Norm Wattenberger's Blackjack Software, both of which include a trip bankroll calculator. I'm going to use the same assumptions from the 2% risk of ruin bet spread in Chapter 5. See page 115, $50,000 bankroll and $100,000 bankroll. 5 hours play. 100 units equals 12% trip risk. 150 units equals 2% trip risk. 200 units equals 0.25% trip risk. 10 hours play. 150 units equals 9% trip risk. 200 units equals 3% trip risk. 250 units equals 0.6% trip risk. 20 hours play. 200 units equals 10% trip risk. 250 units equals 4% trip risk. 300 units equals 1.6% trip risk. The longer your trip, the more money you should plan on bringing. How much exactly? I would say that you need to weigh the risk of running out of money with the risks associated with traveling with large amounts of cash. Running low on money on a trip is miserable. If you're out of money you can't generate a view, tuck your tail between your legs and drive home, but bringing too much money introduces other risks, as this next story illustrates. Followed it was 4:30 a.m. and we were up $16,000. I was the BP for the last 8 hours of the play. We were exhausted, so someone gave the signal and we called it a night. I started making my way through the casino when I noticed another casino patron, who'd been playing all night and losing, also heading toward the exit about 15 feet behind me. He'd seen how much I was winning and I knew that he was clearly annoyed by me. Sometimes when gamblers are on a losing streak, they really can't stand some young rich kid winning like crazy. He let me know that he didn't like me changing up the cards at his table and he'd even pulled back his bet at one point. I didn't want to be paranoid, but I kept an eye on him. I weaved through rows of slot machines and headed up the escalator toward the parking garage. He also took the escalator. When I got to the top, I saw a security desk off to the side. Rather than entering the parking garage, I hung a right and made small talk with a 60-year-old bored security guard. "How's your night going?" Fine," the guard replied. I glanced over my shoulder and saw my shadower at the top of the escalator, crouched down and pretending to tie his shoe. "So, is your shift almost up or did you just get started?" "4 more hours." "Can I help you with something?" "You see the guy over there pretending to tie his shoe?" I motioned. "I think he might be preparing to rob me. I won a lot tonight and he's been following me from the blackjack pit all the way across the casino floor." The security guard grabbed a walkie-talkie handset on his chest. "Hi, I need surveillance on the young male at the top of the elevator tying his shoe, as well as eyes on the young male standing at my security booth." A few minutes later, I was greeted by several security guards, all with walkie-talkies, who were there to escort me to my car. As we started walking through the parking garage, the security guard informed me that they'd had reports of gang members following people to their homes, then robbing them there, where no one was watching. I didn't want Jeff, Sammy, and Ben being seen waiting in the car for me, so I texted them. They headed out on foot to a location where I could pick them up with the rental car. My cadre of security and I exited the parking garage elevator at my level and started walking toward the rental car. All of a sudden, I heard from the security guard's radio, "He's right behind you on parking level 5. I looked over my shoulder and the guy was still following me. "Man, this guy's persistent, and I've got $76,000 on me." The security guard informed me that they were sending a casino security SUV to escort me to the freeway. Seconds later, a giant white Ford Explorer arrived. I hopped in my rental car and the SUV followed me all the way to the freeway, making sure my shadower hadn't tried to tail me. I took the first exit off the freeway and circled back toward the casino to pick up my teammates. As soon as they got in the car, Sammy said, "That's it. I'm gonna start packing heat." We talked him down and headed back to our hotel to get some rest, even though it was now daylight outside. The moral of the story is be aware, be smart, and take every precaution to keep yourself safe. I've personally known a few hundred professional card counters and I can think of only 2 times that one of them was robbed. In one instance, the guy had a reputation for bragging at the casinos about how much he'd won. Someone decided to get to know him and learned his address, then robbed his house when he was gone. The other guy was held up outside a casino. I know you can't totally prevent being mugged or robbed, but when in doubt, ask for a security escort to your car. I've done this countless times when I had a big win, especially when it was dark outside. Some security guards spend half their shifts escorting players to their cars. It's as routine as a coffee break, and I take full advantage of the service, especially when gamblers have seen me playing with tens of thousands of dollars. Another lesson is to listen closely to your intuition. If a situation raises even a faint alarm bell, don't ignore it. Tell yourself it's nothing, or worst of all, convince yourself that you can subdue an attacker. Personal safety experts uniformly agree that keeping yourself out of trouble by taking whatever precautions are necessary, even if it turns out to be a false alarm, is vastly preferable to having to extricate yourself from a potentially serious or dangerous situation. Oh, And keep your finances to yourself. Bragging strokes your ego a bit, but it just isn't worth any extra attention or notoriety. Protect your money. When I first started going to the casino, I brought $500 with me. It was nerve-wracking to have even that much money in my wallet, but as my wins and losses climbed into the hundreds of dollars every night, I started becoming habituated to having that much cash on me. Pretty soon, $1,000 wins and losses were routine, and $5,000 wins became more frequent. Then $10,000, then $20,000. Soon, dealing with tens of thousands of dollars became normal, sometimes too normal. If you aren't careful, you can get way too comfortable with a lot of cash. One particularly foolish example was when my wife, my best friend, and I started learning how to play poker. None of us had a poker chip set, so instead we used $100 and $500 chips that I had in my bankroll stash from a local casino. How stupid was that? If we dropped or misplaced a single $500 chip, it would have been more expensive than buying even multiple high-end poker chip sets. I tell people that the first commandment of card counting is, protect thy money. In my experience, you can take 3 simple steps toward that end. Respect the money. Most people have a hard time grasping the differences in large amounts. When they think of a millionaire and a billionaire, it's easy to lump them together as similar, even though a billionaire has 1,000 times more money than a millionaire. In the same way, it's easy to get desensitized to the weight of bankroll money. I might treat my tens trap, $10,000, about as carefully as a book of McDonald's coupons. Don't do it. Force yourself to take into account each bill and casino chip in your possession. Have a system. The church team instituted team policies for money protection. Every member on the team had to install a fireproof safe bolted into the floor or wall. Safes, even heavy gun safes, are practically worthless if they're not secured. We also had procedures for counting money, transferring money to another team member, and carrying money through airports. I discuss airports and traveling with money shortly. Take the time to think through your systems. Are your pockets secure? Some of my pro card counter friends have had safes installed in their cars, either in the trunk or glove box. The company locked it sells a slash-proof bag secured by a padlock. There are any number of ways to have systems in place to protect your bankroll. Just make sure you take the time and energy to create one for every step along the way. And then, follow the systems. I've been on teams with several people who have physically lost a portion of their bankroll. Every time it happened, it involved something that could have been avoided. One put the money in a pocket and it fell out. Another left it in an unlocked car. A third didn't immediately put the bankroll money back into his safe when he got home from a trip and it went missing. We're all exhausted when we get home from the casino in the middle of the night or after a 5-day trip across the country. But what good are your wins and investments if you don't protect them every minute they're in your possession? Transporting cash domestically. When we planned our first major trip, Sammy refused to fly with bankroll money. He'd heard a horror story about a player getting his bankroll seized at gate security by TSA agents and wanted to use the banks instead. Ben argued for the system that he learned from his time with a larger team, which involved carrying the cash through airports, but with several safeguarding steps in place. However, Sammy wouldn't budge, so we agreed to use a bank. Sammy and I each put $40,000 into our personal Bank of America checking accounts 2 weeks before the trip. Then we each called a Bank of America branch near the airport we were flying into. I explained that I needed to withdraw $40,000 on a specific date and wanted to make sure they would have cash available. "Oh, yeah, not a problem, Mr. Jones. We'll have it ready for you." We even called again a week later just to double check that they were prepared for our large cash withdrawals. "Yes, Mr. Jones, we will have your money ready for you in $100 bills. A week later, we arrived in Chicago, grabbed our rental car, and drove straight to the bank. "I would like to withdraw $40,000 in hundreds," I said to the teller. "I don't think we have that much cash. Let me get my manager." I looked over and Sammy was clearly getting the same runaround. A few minutes passed before the manager arrived, asking, "What can I help you with?" "I need to withdraw $40,000 from my account." "No problem. We can give you a cashier's check." "No, I need cash," I said. "I called ahead of time, twice, to make sure you'd have cash available." "What do you need that much money for?" "Well, it's my money, it's in my account, and I ordered it ahead of time to make sure you would have it available." "I don't think I need an explanation for why I want to access my own money. I can give you a cashier's check, but we certainly don't keep that much cash around." "That's why I ordered it ahead of time." I glanced over at Sammy again and the big guy looked like he was going to punch someone. They brought us to a cubicle and had us wait for another 30 minutes. Until they produced the $80,000. Only $20,000 was in hundreds. Another $20,000 was in $50 bills and the remaining $40,000 was in $20 bills. I'd never seen such a large stack of cash. 80 large and hundreds would have easily fit in our pockets. But now we had the equivalent in cubic inches of trying to carry around $250,000. We asked if the bank had a canvas bag for carrying the money. They returned with a large clear plastic bag. I couldn't figure out what to make of that. Was the bank manager trying to teach us a lesson by helping us get robbed? Or was he the most coolest bank manager in the history of paper money? Fortunately, if that's the right word, we lost $45,000 in the first hour of play, all $20s, then won most of it back in the next hour, allowing us to cash the $40,000 in chips for $100s. Then it was just a process of continuing to buy in with the remaining $50s until we had all $100 bills. Sami continued refusing to carry cash through the airports for a couple more trips until one particularly rough trip that ended with us flying home early on a Saturday night. The banks were closed until Monday morning, so we had no choice but to carry our cash home. With the precautions been learned from his team play, it was just fine. I never again used banks to transport money for a trip. Traveling through airports for the entire life of the church team, we carried cash through airports. When the cash is on your person, you can simply hit the ground running when you arrive. You can fly in or out of a city any day of the week and any time of day or night without having to worry about bank hours, holidays, or anything else. We made hundreds of trips and not once did we have money seized at an airport. 2 players had to miss a flight because of questioning from the D. But when you consider that we had 24 people flying hundreds of thousands of miles across the country every week for 6 years, I'm pleased that only 2 people had to reschedule flights, with their money intact. We simply told them how much money we had and what it was for. Full-body airport scanners arrived during the last couple of years of the church team. Still, we continued to carry our cash through the airports with no issues other than occasional questioning from TSA. Since we were following the law, were cooperative, and had spreadsheet records of what we did with the money, we never had a problem. If they questioned us, our players had results of every session played, a legal business license, contact info for management, and a lawyer's phone number to call. You can decide for yourself how you want to transport cash, but whatever you choose, have a system and follow it rigidly. International play. Hey colon, it was Joe. I found a game in another country that I think is worth over $1,000 an hour. Can you help me run the numbers? Sure, I answered. Send me the info. A few hours later, I called Joe back with my simulation results. Hey, man, it's not 1,000 an hour. It's closer to 1,300. And it looks like you get to the long run in about 40 hours. Let me know how it goes. I might have to join you. Sure thing. And yeah, I got 1,200 an hour. Just wanted a second set of eyes to make sure this game is what I think it is. 2 weeks later, I got a text from Joe that he and his teammate had won more than $100,000 and were no longer welcome at the game. Not bad for 2 weeks of work. The casino didn't even know what Joe was doing. They just couldn't take any more of the beating. Playing blackjack in the US is a bit more consistent. Sure, some casinos aren't worth playing and others have very juicy games. But when you get to international play, things get really inconsistent. One country might have all continuous shuffle machines, so you can't count cards at all. Conversely, you might stumble across a game that card counters in the US only dream of. This was one of those situations. Scouting international games can be difficult and expensive, but when you find a good one, it can be worth all the effort. I've heard of people camping out at a game for months overseas. Being married with kids, I didn't want to be gone for long stretches of time, so I haven't spent much time playing internationally. Though I have made several successful trips to Canada. I do know that if you're hoping to check out international casinos, there are a few things you should be aware of. Traveling internationally with cash. One day while we were together, Ben's phone rang. He turned to me. It's Garrett. I wonder what's up. He answered and put the call on speakerphone. The guys at the US border took our cash. Ben exclaimed. What? They said we didn't declare it properly leaving the US, so they took it all. I asked, how much? 107,000. They gave us a receipt and said we have to prove it's our money. This was the first time the church team tried playing internationally. On our previous team, we drove up to play in Canada a few times. It had always gone fine for us, though it was a bit of a headache at the border. Garrett and another team member, Ford, weren't even planning on going to Canada. They'd booked a 5-day trip to Detroit, but after 3 days, they were fired. The next closest place worth trying was Windsor, in Ontario across the bridge from Detroit. So we told them to give it a try. We knew they didn't have their passports, but there was nothing else to do, and maybe our friendly neighbors to the north would still let them in. They arrived at the Canadian border and informed the agents that they had $107,000, but no passports. The Canadian Border Patrol, very politely, I'm sure, said that they couldn't enter without passports, so they had to immediately turn around and re-enter the US. That's when they encountered the problem. When traveling internationally, you need to declare when you're carrying more than $10,000. And you don't just declare it to the country you're entering upon arrival. You need to declare it 4 times. When you leave a country, enter the new country, leave the new country, and enter another country or re-enter the country you left. Garrett and Ford declared the money when they tried to enter Canada, then again when re-entering the US, but they hadn't declared it when they left the US, so when they attempted to go back, which is technically re-entering the US, they informed the US Border Patrol agents that they didn't gain access into Canada and were simply staying in the US with the $107,000 they had. But the Border Patrol had no records of Ford and Garrett leaving the US with $107,000, which they technically did by approaching the Canadian border guards. As far as the US agents were concerned, this $107,000 didn't exist 30 minutes earlier when Ford and Garrett left the homeland, so it had to be drug money that they were trying to smuggle. These would be the world's dumbest drug smugglers, of course, by way of declaring their cash at the border. So the border agents seized the money and gave Garrett and Ford receipts with contact info if they were interested in getting their $100,000+ back. At the time, this was more than 20% of our entire bankroll. No way were we forfeiting and moving on from that $107,000. In our youthful optimism, rather than hire a lawyer to get the money back, we had Ben tackle it himself. His full-time job for 3 months was to prove that the money was lawfully ours. He filled a massive 3-ring binder with all of our records, investor agreements, personal letters from investors, players, former players, including a local cop who used to spot for us, and our accountant. Amazingly, it worked. About 3 months later, we received 2 checks from the US Treasury, minus a $10,000 fine. They didn't explain the fine, nor was it even proportional. Garrett and Ford were carrying different amounts of cash, but the government also slapped a flat $5,000 fine on each. But at the end of the day, I'm sure we would have spent at least $10,000 on legal fees getting the money back and probably still had to pay the fine. So we were happy to get $97,000 of our bankroll back, and we learned an important lesson. So is the lesson that you shouldn't travel internationally? Not at all. There are some really valuable games internationally, and we had some players continue to visit casinos in Canada. But you have to be very careful about declaring the cash all 4 times if you're going to carry more than $10,000 in paper money across the border. Foreign currency exchange. Beyond following the proper protocol to get your money into another country, you must also take into consideration the cost of exchanging one country's currency for another's. Let's say you take $40,000 with you to Canada. If you're paying a 3.5% fee for currency exchange each way, you're down $2,800 before you've even generated 1 penny of. If you plan to play a game worth $200 an hour, you'd need 14 hours to break even. That's a lot of blackjack just to cover your exchange fees. Here are a few ways to lower the costs. Casino currency exchange. Some casinos exchange currency at the cashier's cage. If you exchange it back within 24 hours, they give you the same rate you started with, so there's no cost whatsoever. Just be sure to exchange it back in time. The rate they slap you with if it's more than 24 hours is always horrendous, likely costing you more than the EV you generated in a day's worth of play. If you plan on being there for several days, you can go through the exchange process each day. It's a bit of a pain, but will give you a 0% exchange rate. Beyond the casino, you can often get better rates. When I first traveled to Canada, I found that Chinatown had the best currency exchange rates in Vancouver. Do some research and find out where you can get the best rate. Be aware that sometimes, you can negotiate an even better rate for a larger cash transaction. Don't exchange it all at once. If you bring, say, $40,000 on a 10-day international trip, there's likely no reason to exchange it all at once. Hopefully, you won't need to tap into the entire trip bankroll. If you can get away with exchanging only $10,000, you're paying 1/4 the total fees. On the other hand, Vagabond, a friend who's played internationally for a long time, tells me, I've seen cashier cages that offer the same rate for exchanging money for as short as until the end of the casino day, usually 6 a.m., and as long as a week. Usually, a receipt is kept and turned in later to retrieve the US dollars. Some countries have overly strict rules. For example, the casino boats in Goa, India, are only allowed to exchange up to $2,000 per customer per month. This can usually be overcome by speaking with the casino manager, but not always. You can often get a better rate exchanging a stronger currency like the US dollar, Singapore dollar, and Hong Kong dollar in poorer countries where most locals want to sell their weaker currency. Vagabond says, I absolutely never buy foreign currency within the US. Visa and MasterCard debit cards have excellent rates for getting small amounts, $1,000 or $2,000 per day, but check with the bank to see if there are any foreign transaction fees. The best banks have no fees and reimburse the ATM withdrawal fee. Many casinos use currencies that aren't the official currency for their country. Some casinos also have 2 kinds of chips for 2 different currencies, like euros and Swiss francs. Macau casinos use Hong Kong dollars, many South American casinos use US dollars. Laos and Cambodia use US dollars. They're often very strict about accepting only crisp and clean bills, my friend says, which once resulted in half of my bankroll being deemed worthless paper. Trip length: with the increased expenses for an international trip, you should consider making it a bit longer. Using our previous example of $40,000, let's say you find a rate of 2% each way. If you needed to exchange all of it, you are now out $1,600, give or take, depending on if you win or lose money on your trip. That's a lot of money. But if you plan a 15-day trip that generates $15,000 of total EV, it makes the $1,600 fee a bit more palatable. The Internationalista Ultimate. How did you get interested in card counting? I was always interested in card games. In our school, we actually had a room that was diaresis negationsly known as casino, where we played small stakes games. Fast forward a couple years. At a casino in Finland, a friend told me of something called basic strategy and that the house advantage is really small if you follow it. After that, I heard about card counting here and there, so I bought some books out of interest. I thought there was no chance whatsoever of it working, since casinos would simply not allow it. Then I read some more, searched the web for hours, and was infected. It seems so intriguing to sit down at a table and have the advantage without knowing anyone around you. Moreover, I'd studied math and have a strong numbers background, so I thought I could actually do it if it was possible at all. Actually, finding BJA was the final step in convincing myself that it is possible. From there, it was history, countless books, BJA membership with hours of videos and reading, and finally playing. Do you have a full-time job? At the time I started training, I had a 50-ish hour a week job. That was the reason it took me quite some time to get into it deeply. When I actually started playing with my full bankroll, it coincided with my decision to quit my job. I can't say that card counting was the reason for quitting, but it definitely played a role. I learned that most of the card counting scene is in the US, and coincidentally again the boot camp took place some weeks after I quit my job. So I made the decision to combine a holiday with blackjack. I took a 3-month holiday, blackjack trip to the US and went for it. I'd been playing for a year after that, when I suddenly received an diaresis negation order from an insurance company for a nice job as a risk manager. I took the opportunity to have an income without much variance again. I'd also have much more time with my girlfriend, who always supported me, but missed me when I was traveling around the globe. With a steady well-paying job, what attracted you to card counting? I always loved card games and I'm a numbers guy, so this is the perfect match and a good base for playing blackjack professionally. Besides, just sitting at a table and making money with pure brain work seemed very intriguing to me. There was this moment when I just thought, I'll do it. I'll be at casinos for money just with my brain. My full-time job wasn't fulfilling to me anymore, so I wanted to do something else anyway. What did your training look like? When did you know you were ready? In the beginning, I read book after book, and on this path, I found the diaresis negation rent versions for deviations and maybe even for basic strategy. I wanted to know the exact answer for these numbers and did a lot of research before taking any cards in my hands. Looking back, this actually helped me gain a deep understanding of what's going on. I also made myself flashcards for deviations and took them with me to work. What I especially liked, and still use today, are my self-made Excel tables with all the deviations I use, right now about 80. On the left side and an empty table on the right. Printing it and folding it in the middle lets me out the sheet wherever I am and have the information I need on the back. Meanwhile, I started counting a 1 deck, 2 decks, 1 card at a time, 2 cards at a time, etc. I bought some training material, like cards, discard tray, shoe, blackjack felt, and chips. The practical aspects, such as dealing to one another, seem the most the diaresis negation cult, since I'm based in Europe and there are so few of us over here. So, somewhat shaking, I asked my girlfriend to deal to me. At first, I used just basic strategy, then later included all the ingredients. In the beginning, she trained me quite often. Additionally, I got a couple of apps on my phone, one of which has mistakes in it, and I bought CVCX and CVBJ. These also helped me understand betting and I got to play some thousand hands and to check the results before betting actual money. Can you give a brief overview of your first big trip to the US? Hours, EV, Avenue. I was so excited when I landed and curious about the first step, getting into the country with more than $10,000. I never declared anything before, but it went easy and I was on my path. After some days in Vegas, I attended BJA's Blackjack Boot Camp. How exciting for me as the only non-American with all the pros and other guys. Boot camp gave my playing a boost. It was clear to me that I was still making some mistakes, while on the other hand I knew what I could do to eliminate them quickly. And I did. After boot camp, I traveled the western United States from Vegas, heading north to Seattle, then down to San Diego, in order to see lots of the country, all the while beating casinos. After each session, I made my notes regarding the game and conditions, so I could use the CVCX Blackjack software to nail down the numbers for the session. Final figure showed 292 playing hours with an EV of 33,000. I also made some nice graphs and was proud that my final avenue, actual value, figure was nearly the Samia at 32,500. This gave me an average earning per hour of 111. The overall result paid for my 3-month trip and gave me some additional financial freedom for the time after coming back to Europe. Oh, and declaration went smooth again in the US, as well as back home. Along with playing in the US, where else have you played? After some weeks, I moved on to playing in Europe. Together with a friend, we collected lots of information about casinos there. Thanks, LEDSP. My map showed tons of casinos. I just had to learn the hard way that tons amongst these tons have continuous Shui dialysis negation machines, CSMs, only. So I drove a lot, starting in Belgium and France, bypassing CSM countries like Netherlands and Luxembourg, then to Italy, Switzerland, and Germany. These subtours took some months, and after some pause, I to the UK and Ireland. Besides lots of travel, I also had some currency issues. I just exchanged as much as I thought I'd need, using CVCX a lot, taking some risks of trip bankruptcy. I realized that I'd have to travel with huge amounts in order to sometimes just learn that there are CSMs or have a miserable penetration or to be half shoed after betting some hundreds for the RST time just because they're frightened of big money. In the end, I played 187 hours with an EV of more than 19,000 euros and was able to finish with an avenue of 16.5. But it seemed much harder work than in the US, since I had to travel so much. During this trip in Europe, I sometimes dreamed of the general conditions in the US and finally decided to do another trip. This time I wanted to see the Bahamas, again, not only the casinos, and on the way check out some places on the US East Coast. This whole trip turned out to be very successful, despite the fact that there are only a few places to play. I managed to log 53 hours with an EV of a little more than 8,000. This alone would have more than paid the trip expenses, as I knew in advance. But variance was with me and I was rewarded with a pro T of around 15,000. It paid OI dialysis negation nicely to play the non-American tourist just throwing around some money. Finally, a pro tip. Knowing that U.S. immigration for flights from Nassau to the U.S. is already in the airport of Nassau helps a lot. I nearly missed my flight due to declaration. Do you think you're done as a card counter? Not at all. I love it and will continue playing. For now, it'll just be on long weekend trips or smaller holidays. I'd love to play in Asia, who knows? From the date I started reading the first book, Blackjack has always been on my mind and it won't vanish. That's for sure. I'd love to go back to the tables more intensely at a later stage. Like Schwarzenegger said, I'll be back. What has been the best part of becoming an advantage player? The winnings, the fun and thrill when making max bets, combined with the ability to see and learn about other countries for free. And most importantly, I learned a lot about myself, which is highly valuable.